Good evening. Can you hear me? Good. My name is Gail Swanlin. I'm an adjunct faculty in UCLA's Department of Design Media Arts. I welcome all of you to the fifth and final lecture in the Expanded Design Series, coordinated by Erki Hutomo and myself. This evening, I am delighted and honored to introduce David Wilson, an artist, designer, inventor, filmmaker, and the director and curator of the Museum of Jurassic Technology. David Wilson was recognized this year by the MacArthur Fellowship Foundation. UCLA wishes to celebrate David's fellowship and his exceptionally creative and luminous contribution to our world. This evening, David will be speaking on themes from the Museum of Jurassic Technology. One of the first things one encounters when entering the museum are the words, "Guided along as if it were a chain of flowers into the mysteries of life." Awe seems a pale word to describe what lies inside. The Museum of Jurassic Technology, whose proximity in Culver City is quite possibly the best reason to live in Los Angeles. David's work and the museum are the subject of the book, Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonder, whose cover proclaims the museum to be charmingly provocative. Fluent in Gray Fox and internationally renowned for serenading the creatures of Venice Boulevard via accordion, please welcome Mr. David Wilson.
So is this on? Can you hear me? Gee whiz, Gail. Really? Well, thank you all enormously for coming. That was maybe the most provocative and kind of hard to follow introduction I've ever received. I'll try in some feeble way to live up to some small percentage of that. It's what, rather than talk about the museum, is what we've discovered over time is that the best thing to do is to just present one area of interest of the museum to people, in events like this. And the area of interest that I've actually been talking about most recently and taking around from place to place is an interest that the museum has had really almost since its beginning, an interest in very small things, in microscopic, actually it's a submission of the museum, so to speak. And we say that the submission is to bring to a larger audience evidence of human artistry and ingenuity on the microscopic scale. We've done 2 or 3 exhibits to date and are in the process of planning a handful of new exhibits. Excuse me. I think maybe with that, but on the way driving up here, I realized that Gail hadn't seen one of our most recent efforts, which is a film, the first in a series of films that we're going to be showing in the museum beginning in, a month or 6 weeks or so. We're building a small theater upstairs above the first building that you enter into when you come into the museum, and we will kind of on the hour run one of these documentaries that we're in the process of making. We just finished the first one, and it occurred to me driving up that Gail hadn't seen it, and so I thought that might be a good thing to do. So rather than do the talk that I was going to do, I think we'll show the film instead. But as part of that is what I would like to do is give a little background. The film is based around this interest of ours in microminiatures. And let me begin by showing a handful of slides from, an exhibition that we've had that some of you may know called the unique world of micro-miniatures of Hagab Sandaljan, the Eye of the Needle. I'll show, for those of you who were not able to see any of Hagab Sandaljan's work at the museum, I'll show some of those slides and a few others, and then we'll go ahead and show this film. The film's about 35 minutes, so I'll talk for maybe 20 minutes, show some slides, show the film, and after that, answer whatever kinds of questions anyone may have. So this is, I guess, the device.
On the left-hand side.
On left hand, great, thanks. When, actually, could those come down a little too? Am I in people's way if I stand over here? When we opened the museum at our current location in about 1988, 1999, a Pasadena woman named Mary Rose Cannon, who some of you may know, she's one of the founders of the what was the Pasadena Film Forum and now is Film Forum, told us that she had a surprise for us, and the surprise was that in her family was this quite extraordinary and wonderful collection of what really could only be called rarities and artifacts in kind of the antiquated sense. It was a collection that her grandfather, a fellow named George Bilius, had essentially stolen from a couple of gardeners who lived in southwestern Nebraska and did this great collecting in the early part of the century, in the teens and 20s. It was a collection of the ones we have on exhibit now are a child's caul, which is a membrane that covers the face, sometimes of a child at birth, the extinct Flemish moths that are at the museum, a number of strange and strangely disorganized artifacts. And in that collection was this object. It's a fruit stone carving. Oh shoot! Hold on just a second. I should have thought of this. I should really read this to you. And I think I've got it here if I can find it fast. Yeah. It's a fruit stone carving, and curiously, most early collections would have a fruit stone carving as part of the collection. It's one of those objects that seem to be obligatory in early collections. I'm almost there. Hold on. Aha. Okay, here it is. It came with this piece of text. And the text reads, "Almond stone. The front is carved with a Flemish landscape in which is seated a bearded man wearing a beret, a long tunic of classical character, and thick-soled shoes. He's seated with a viol held between his knees while he tunes one of the strings. In the distance are representations of animals, including a lion, a bear, an elephant ridden by a monkey, a boar, a dog, a donkey, a stag, a camel, a horse, a bull, a bird, a goat, a lynx, and a group of rabbits, the latter sitting under a branch on which sits an owl, another bird, and a squirrel. On the back is shown an unusually grim crucifixion with a soldier on horseback, Longinus piercing Christ's side with a lance. The cross is surmounted by a titulus inscribed INRI in bricked ground." So we thought this was an extraordinary and wonderful thing, and actually a remarkable object of quite, minute craft. We thought that for a period of time until on one Sunday afternoon we were led to a Armenian Orthodox church in Boyle Heights, where we found a number of tablecloths laid out And on these, white tablecloths, and on the white tablecloths were these beautiful exhibition devices, these viewing devices of marble and brass, and it's what they were presenting were the works of this man, Hagab Sandaljan. Each of these cases had a microscope eyepiece mounted in the top of it, and in looking through the microscope eyepiece, one found an object such as this being Pope John Paul II, carved from human hair and then carefully, constructed and painted. To give you a sense of scale, the cross that the Pope is holding is a human hair that's been split 7 times. This is another of Hagab's pieces that's called Aramix hair. Each one of these birds, the birds on the wire, are carved from one of Hagab's own hairs, and the wire on which the birds are sitting is the hair of Aramek, Hagab's infant grandson. This is one of Hagab's masterpieces, Napoleon. In the eye of a needle, there's a strange and wonderful irony about this small man with very large plans being reduced to such extraordinarily small size. Hagab was when Hagab was alive, he died in 1990, just before the our first presentation of his work. When he was alive, there were 3 living micro-miniaturists. Hagab was the only one of the 3 to paint his work. This is an unpainted piece of Hagab's. It's Chow Chow San from Madame Butterfly, and this beautiful crystalline-like, sculpture that he's made is Hagab's white hair. White hair, in fact, being pigmentless hair. In other words, clear hair, gives it this beautiful glass-like quality. But most of his works he painted. This is a larger work. It's on a grain of rice. It's Mezrab Mishtot, who was a very important person in Armenian history. He was the creator of the Armenian syllabary. Another larger work, this one unusually not carved out of gold, is a violin called Broken Dreams. It actually references 2 events in Hagab's life. The first was the smashing of his violin by his father when Hagab was a child growing up in Alexandria, because he didn't want his son to pursue an artistic career. The second was then when Hagab brought his family and immigrated to this country in 1980. He was unable to find work here in his chosen field, which was that of a concert violinist and violin instructor. He had, in fact, in the Soviet Union, created a system of violin instruction called the ergonomic method of violin instruction, which became the state-supported, the state-endorsed method of violin construction throughout the whole of the Soviet Union. So he was quite successful. But when he came to this country, he was unable to find work, either as a violin teacher or performer, and this Broken Dreams references that. Another work on rice. Hagab wore many hats. One of his hats was as a fervent Armenian revolutionary, and this was a commemorative piece he did in 1990, just before his death, in commemoration of the 100th year anniversary of the founding of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. This is really, we feel, one of Hagab's absolute masterworks. It's quite clearly goofy. We love the way his ear seems to be in motion, and his arms seem to almost be smearing with this in this kind of gesture that he's creating. When we did this exhibition, this first exhibition in 1990, we were concerned that the people at the Walt Disney Corporation the legal staff of the Walt Disney Corporation might come down heavily on us for presenting representations of their creations. Hagab loved all things American when he immigrated to this country, including the creations of the Walt Disney Corporation, but we were concerned that they may not have appreciated that, and so we approached the Disney legal staff. Fortunately, our daughter was in elementary, or not in elementary school, in preschool, with the daughter of one of the vice presidents of animation in at Disney, and I mean, our daughter did not go to a fancy preschool. Their daughter went to a poor preschool, but somehow through that connection, he was really quite an extraordinarily wonderful person, and he arranged for their legal staff to give us a license to show these works for forever, and the family as well for $1. The only other license they'd ever granted was, at that point, to an artist was to Andy Warhol, which they I believe charged $250,000 for. Ours was $1, and we figured it was probably somehow done by weight or volume. But this lovely piece is quite, you know who this is. So, and if you know the names of the individual little fellows, you can clearly identify and name them. When we did the 1990 exhibition of Hagab's work, we agreed with the family that that exhibition actually became an homage to Hagab and a commemoration. The whole of the Armenian community, well, maybe not the whole, but enormous numbers of the people of the Armenian community in Los Angeles turned out to honor the memory of Hagab. But we decided at that time, having only shown approximately half of the works, that we would then mount another exhibition in which we would show all the works, which we then did in 1995. At that point, we also agreed with the family we would then publish a catalog, which we did, really just a thin volume, but something that represented all of Hagab's work. And in doing that, we asked a writer, friend of ours, Ralph Rugoff, who used to write here in Los Angeles and then unfortunately moved away, to write the essay for us, which he did beautifully. And in writing that essay, he ran across, in researching the history of this unusual art form, he ran across references to another living microminiaturist in Kyiv in the Ukraine, a fellow purportedly named Nikolai Sagestri. So Ralph and I got on a plane one night and flew off in the middle of winter to this place, and we were directed to this most extraordinary of places, which is Kyiv-Petrovsk Lavra. It's a 20 or 25 square block Ukrainian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox monastery. It's the place where Christianity entered Russia. Many of the buildings here date back 1,000 years. A truly remarkable place. The whole of the ground underneath these many, many buildings that constitute the monastery are riddled with catacombs that have the essentially mummified remains of the Orthodox saints, many of whom will wall themselves inside small chambers at a certain point in their life with only a hole big enough for food and drink, and live out the rest of their days until they die. Their remains are then displayed in glass coffins in these catacombs under the monastery, and you're encouraged to take a candle and walk from coffin to coffin to coffin and kiss each coffin in a way of honoring the saints of Orthodoxy. Behind its many buildings and behind most of these big, thick wooden doors, you'll find wooden floors and 500 to 1,000-year-old icons, things of just absolute beauty, the holiest and most sacred relics of all of Orthodoxy. Behind one of these doors, however, we found this room that looks more like a set from Tarkovsky's Solaris, a Russian science fiction set, than a place of orthodoxy. And this is, in fact, the museum of this man, Nikolai Sugestry. Everything in this space has absolute significance in the cosmology that this man has constructed, his own kind of personal cosmology, his own understanding of the world. This sine wave is very important in his understanding of the order of things, and in the middle of each of the peaks of the sine wave is a large, about 4-foot diameter glass dish. In each dish is a small eyepiece, and through each eyepiece one finds a work like this. This is a dragonfly. His primary medium is gold, and he carved this from gold. The head of the dragonfly is approximately the diameter of 3 human hairs, and it's a working clock. This is his photo of it. Our photos weren't as good. We didn't have as long to photograph. His work as Hagab Sandaljan. This is Nikolai Sugestry, quite an extraordinary person from many, many points of view. Okay, thank you. Just as proof that we were there, this is Ralph on the right, Nikolai, and there I am on the left. This is his workroom, which was remarkably like the workroom of Hagab Sandaljan's, which had very few tools. A dissecting microscope of not terribly great power, and then just the smallest of tools. Very unimpressive tools, mostly just needles and hairs as tools, and very strange small things. In the film you'll see some evidence of those tools. This ship is called the Ship of the Soul, or the Ship of Red Sails. It's also carved from gold. The rigging of the ship has a diameter purportedly of 1/400th the diameter of a human hair. This is a chess game on the head of a pin. It's a very important game to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians and the Russians haven't always gotten along, and this was the checkmate when Stanislav Ostapenko, a famed Ukrainian chess master, beat the famed Russian chess master whose name I cannot remember. This is carved from fruit stone. It's lovely. Nikolai Sugestry's work was probably more precise than Hagab's, just almost unimaginably precise, but somehow seemed to come from almost an Arctic region, or a place where it didn't have quite the warmth or the openness that Hagab's had, but it has this precision that is really astonishing. This is Ernest Hemingway, who was one of the few American authors that were eulogized during Soviet times. That's on a pear seed. Yuri Gagarin, the famed astronaut. This is a lock. I guess that's actually upside down. Doesn't make so much difference. I see this looks like a drawing. In fact, it's some form of photo from Nikolai Sugestry's work, but I've seen this. I know it exists. It's a lock with a key on a severed human hair. It's the tip of a human hair, and the components of the lock are laid out across the top here of the hair, and the finished lock there at the bottom. This is then a rose in a hollowed out human hair. Nikolai Sugestri felt that he was, as he put it, able to work the system, whatever system was in power, and in fact he must have been, because the Soviets felt that his work was of strategic importance, which an argument could easily be made that it was, of actual quite important work, not only from an artistic point of view, but from the point of view of technology. And as a result, they gave him whatever he wanted. The thing he wanted more than anything else was to have a museum to his work in this place in Kiev-Petrovsk Lavra, which was it's the only work in the whole of the Lavra that is not religious in nature. And as a thanks, he did this portrait of Lenin. But of course, his portrait of Lenin couldn't be just like any portrait, and on close inspection, you find that in fact the portrait is made from his handwriting, and the handwriting is a treatise that Lenin wrote in the many years earlier, I guess in the 30s probably, and it's a treatise on how to control a population by creating a famine in the population, which is ironically exactly what the Russians did, the Soviets did in the Ukraine then in the 50s. So this homage to Lenin then ends up with as a kind of two-edged sword. I think that's all the slides. So if we can go ahead, I guess probably the next thing to do is just go ahead and start the film. I suppose I should say a few things about it. This film has been made over the last 2 years. The film is called Levsha, The Tale of a Lefty from Tula and the Steel Flea. It's taken from a tale by Nikolai Leskov, who's a Russian novelist, a Russian writer, 19th century Russian writer, greatly loved by the Russian people, but almost unknown in this country. His work, Lady Macbeth of Minsk, was made into an opera by Shostakovich, but that's one of the few evidences of Nikolai Leskov that's actually, present in Western culture. But in Russia, he's known and loved by all people. And this tale, Levsha, the tale of the lefty from Tula and the steel flea, is known by virtually every child in the Soviet Union, or in what was the Soviet Union. This film was done in conjunction with friends of ours from St. Petersburg. They have an institution called Cabinet, and you'll see at the beginning of the film a logo, their logo, as well as the SFDUI, which is the museum's publication branch. So with kind of those few remarks. Is it possible to kill that light?
хочу рассказать вам историю об одном гениальном умельце-кузнеце по имени Левша, который жил в Туле, небольшом городке неподалеку от великого града Москвы. Но началась эта история не с Левши, а с императора Александра I.
I should have also said that the film's in Russian. Are you involved back here? Are you involved back here?
Yeah, what do you need?
Can we crank the sound up?
Up?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Kind of substantially. Let's try that.
После победоносного завершения Великой военной кампании русский царь Александр I приехал со своим послом, донским казаком генералом Платовым, в Англию. Государь Александр Павлович был человеком любознательным. Ему нравилось путешествовать, осматривать музеи и поражаться всем чудесным изобретениям, которые ему доводилось увидеть. Точным морским барометром, удивительным верблюжьим накидкам и невероятным пистолетом. А вот генералу Платову ничего вокруг не нравилось. Тосковал он по своему родному дому и пил воду кислятку. Царь восхищался работами английских мастеров, а генерал все время повторял: «Все это, конечно, хорошо, но наши-то не хуже». Император Александр I подружился со многими англичанами, и к концу его визита они принесли царю то, что сначала показалось ему пустым подносом. Приглядевшись, однако, царь увидел, что поднос не пуст. В самом центре его какая-то соринка. Оказалось, что соринка это миниатюрная стальная блоха. Игрушка была настолько мала, что разглядеть ее можно было только в микроскоп. Этот чудесный дар произвел на государя очень сильное впечатление. А вот генерал Платов вещицу, конечно, не одобрил и стал еще мрачнее. Генерал Платов, конечно, вещицу не одобрил и стал еще мрачнее. Англичане одарили царя этой удивительной вещицей, только вот шкатулку для ее хранения не предложили, дали лишь ключик, чтобы блоху заводить. Пришлось государю Александру Павловичу купить алмазную коробочку размером с орех, чтобы везти свою танцующую блоху домой, чтобы не унесло ее вместе с пылью. Генерал Платов был вне себя. И не только из-за того, что творение это воспринимал как победу английских мастеров над русскими, а еще из-за английской хитрости, что заставило царя купить алмазную шкатулку. Чтобы покрыть расход, Платов перед дорогой домой незаметно положил микроскоп в карман, ведь они и так уже достаточно потратились.
Это кажется только, что идешь по прямой сквозь года и манящие дали, а по сути спешишь, чтобы снова домой возвратиться по вечной спирали. Мы спорили о смысле жизни, а волны берега омывая, базальт песок перетирали. Эти стихи как бы связаны с работой и не связаны. Но они ассоциативные связаны. Мне кажется, надо и на логичном, и на постулатном уровне. Ну и так далее. То есть тоже в этом выпадке. Вперед, он хочет узнать, что будет завтра, и в то же время ее мышление обращено на то. Человек – это точка космической философской, соединяющая прошлое и будущее, которая движется, и он сам движется.
Вскоре после возвращения домой император Александр I умер. Вся Россия оплакивала своего царя, а вот о танцующей блохе в этой великой печали все позабыли. 10 лет спустя новый царь Николай I нашел у себя во дворце стальную блоху. Она была все в том же алмазном орехе. Генерал Платов объяснил государю Николаю Павловичу, что это за вещица и как ее завести, чтобы она начала танцевать. Потом Платов попросил императора передать микроскопическую блоху русским мастерам из Тулы, чтобы те посмотрели, можно ли сделать с ней что-нибудь такое, чего не могут англичане. Николай I очень доверял русским людям, и генерал Платов повез блоху тульским кузнецам. 2 лучших кузнеца взялись за дело. Самым мастеровитым среди них был косой левша с родинкой на щеке. Они попросили генерала спокойно отправляться к себе на дом, а сами взяли сумочки и скрылись из города. Народ говорил, что они в Киев пошли, почивающим угодникам поклониться. древнейшая православная святыня Киево-Печерская лавра. По летописи основана святым Антонием в 1051 году. За дверями лавры находятся наиболее почитаемые реликвии, святые мощи подвижников православия, древнейшие иконы, но есть и одна совершенно особенная дверь.
Но искусство по этому пути еще не пошло. Еще формы старые, классические. Майолика, керамика, графика. Они все имеют те же размеры, в которых жил человек. Они связаны с нашим бытом. И я здесь, в этом искусстве, тоже, может быть, один из первых перебрался в другой масштаб. И поэтому называем микромир. Но на самом деле в природе, для природы это не микромир. То, что я делаю, это может быть относительно все. И я даже смотрю на миниатюру вообще-то как на монументальное искусство. Потому что трудно сделать великое и малое. И люди это осознают, что сделать, скажем, караван верблюдов, идущих в ушко иглы, это очень сложно. Есть даже библейская такая пословица, что скорее и верблюд пройдет через ушко иглы, нежели богатый расстанется с богатством. Говорят, что богатый на тот свет ничего не может взять, самый одинокий человек богатый. Но это уже другая проблема. Дело в том, что эту вещь, такую работу сделать очень сложно. Я ее выполнил. Или, скажем, сделать Санту-Марию корабль размера спичной головки. И в нем там сотни деталей. И поэтому люди это осознают, и на них производит огромное впечатление. Так же, как и крупные, огромные сооружения сделаны руками человека. Будь это пирамиды, или небоскребы, или корабли гигантские самолеты. Поэтому я вообще смотрю на работы как на свои, на миниатюры, как на монументальное искусство. по эмоциональному результату и по влиянию на людей. Ничего интересного. Вся мысль крутится там в голове. Этих 17 миллиардов. Как его работать, как поставить, как завести.
Еще один спор.
Есть такое выражение философа Менандра: любимцы богов умирает рано. Достигает великих успехов, но рано умирает. Я думаю, что многие талантливые люди — это люди с ослабленной рефлексией самозащиты, они изнашиваются. Поэтому я тоже ленивый, как большинство людей, и для меня очень важно это пересилить лень в себе. Когда я начал делать работу, то сама работа меня отвлекает. Я как бы превосхожу самого себя. Я как бы, как человек, вышедший из окна с 10-20 этажа, не падаю, летаю в своей мечте, которую я выполняю. И таким образом работа сама меня уже увлекает. То есть в основе лежит, еще раз повторяю, труд. Причем надо так сделать работу, что труд этот не был виден, как полет крыла птицы или движение волны, я об этом говорю. Ну и в этом искусстве, технологии создания миниатюр. Все.
Нет, там вот это не профессиональная, это не такая, вот та большая была профессиональная. Нет, я просто совсем, мне сегодня еще придется говорить тоже на камеру.
Usage. Not dangerous, but
Я что говорю, не такой академичный.
blue sky,
Это,
red wine.
да. Мы
You could try a little.
идем от капитализма к коммунизму. Все надо входить, как делать, как его обработать, как поставить. Окей.
Кузнецы же, отслужив молебен в Амценске, вернулись, сошлись в доме левши, заперли двери, закрыли ставни, чтобы никто не видел, что они делают. Когда генерал Платов вернулся за блохой, он поинтересовался, что они сделали. Кузнецы объяснять ничего не стали, лишь сказали: «Все на виду». Тогда он взял с собой левшу, чтобы тот держал ответ перед государем, если тот спросит. Когда они приехали в Санкт-Петербург, государь Николай Павлович осмотрел блоху, но ничего нового в ней не заметил. Она выглядела как и раньше, разве что не танцевала. Генерал Платов рассердился, но государь продолжал верить в русских мастеров и приказал позвать левшу. Кузнеца привели во дворец. Придворные принялись потешаться над его рваной и грязной одеждой. Царь спросил, что русские кузнецы сделали с английской блохой. Левша разъяснил, что они блоху подковали и написали на подковах свои имена. Тут генерал Платов вспомнил об английском микроскопе, который привез 10 лет назад. Николай I посмотрел на блоху через микроскоп и увидел, что та действительно подкована, и что на ней имена всех кузнецов, кроме левши. Он спросил: «А твое где имя левша?» Левша объяснил, что имя его на тонюсеньких гвоздиках, которыми подковки забиты. Но даже в лучший микроскоп нельзя было разглядеть столь тонкую работу и проверить, правду ли говорит кузнец. Государь Николай Павлович был поражен. Он расцеловал левшу. То же сделали и остальные. И еще царь спросил левшу, каким же тот пользовался микроскопом. Левша ответил, что, мол, у кузнецов таких вещей по бедности не бывает, так что работали они по старинке. Левша ответил, что, мол, у кузнецов таких вещей по бедности не бывает, так что работали они по старинке. Меж тем слава о левше дошла до Англии, англичане позвали его к себе. Левша объехал все заводы, особенно присматривался к оружейным. Он многому там научился. Англичане полюбили левшу и хотели, чтобы он остался с ними, научился их механике и женился на красивой английской девушке. Левша ответил, английские девушки, конечно, красивые, но ему нужно домой, к старикам-родителям. Ему дали множество подарков и посадили на корабль, который плыл в Санкт-Петербург. Ему дали множество подарков и посадили на корабль, который плыл в Санкт-Петербург. На корабле левша подружился со шкипером, с которым они всю дорогу пили. Пили они так крепко, что к концу дороги уже не могли говорить. Когда корабль наконец пристал в Санкт-Петербурге, шкипера забрали домой, на английскую набережную. Там бани и доктора поставили его на ноги. Левша же остался один, пьяный. Его забрали в участок, документов при нем не было, а объяснить он ничего не мог.
Your joys
Его забрали в участок. Документов при нем не было, а объяснить он ничего не мог. Его возили из одной больницы в другую, пока не оказался он в больнице для бедных. Там лежал он в горячке на холодном полу и в бреду все время повторял, что у англичан стволы ружейные кирпичом не чистят. Мол, скажите государю, чтобы у нас не чистили. Но никто его не слушал. Когда шкипер пришел в себя, он принялся по всему Санкт-Петербургу искать потерявшегося друга и каким-то чудесным образом нашел его в Обуховской больнице для бедных. Но было уже слишком поздно. Левша умер на глазах у шкипера. Умер, так и не сказав царю, что нельзя чистить ружья кирпичом. Теперь левша – символ русских умельцев и русской души. Без всяких сложных инструментов знал он, как сделать удивительные вещи. Он ничего для себя не просил и любил свою родину. И по сей день в его честь хороший мастер зовется левшой.
So I'd be, happy to answer questions about the film or the whole strange, wonderful world of micro miniatures, or whatever you want, whatever you'd like.
I feel so gross.
Sorry?
I feel so gross.
I know, so big, right?
Have you noticed this might be... Is this something you've just seen as an Eastern European
It's the three prominent practitioners of the art were all from the confines of the former Soviet Union. Nikolai Sajestri, Hagab Sandaljan, and then Hagab and possibly Nikolai's teacher, although this gets to be quite like a shadowy world to try and determine kind of who inspired who and who instructed who. But there's a fellow in Yerevan named Edward Kazarian, who's purportedly the absolute master of this work. He's still alive. He's quite a bit older and has produced a great many pieces. We have yet to get to Yerevan to visit and see him. His representative, a fellow named Andronik Petrosian, came to this country, and we've talked with him and are trying really to get some kind of representation of Edward Kazarian here. Edward Kazarian purportedly has a working television set and a hollowed human hair. We haven't seen it, so we can't vouch for it. But the absolute masters of the work are clearly from former Soviet Union, there are a number of other people that we hear about who are doing very small work as well, and some of it I think quite wonderful. There's a fellow in London whose work I haven't seen firsthand, but I've seen pictures of, that looks quite interesting, and next time we're there, we're definitely going to look him up. There's a woman, a notorious woman from a very rural part of northern Mexico who paints religious scenes on pins that I've seen pictures of again, but haven't seen, that are very beautiful. So there are a few others, but the three sculptors and really the master of the sculptor's craft at that scale were all from that part of the world. And also, I should say that there is, and Linda Duke here knows of a Chinese practitioner of work at this scale that we're in the process of trying to contact and have some kind of representation of. Any other thoughts or questions? Hello?
Is there a relationship between Agapa and Nikolai at all?
No, there actually seems to be no relationship. This gentleman's a younger practitioner of the art, actually. There is apparently no relationship between Hagab and Nikolai so far as we know. In fact, we asked Nikolai immediately if he knew of Hagab's work, and he said he had never heard of it. It's hard for us to tell, though, because that is such a shadowy world that we can't tell if he knew but didn't think that he should say that he knew, or if in fact maybe they really had never heard of each other, and we didn't know of Nikolai's work at the time that Hagab was alive, so we never had the opportunity to ask him. Yes?
Did you shoot all of that on location?
It's all, we went a year ago last August to Russia and shot greatly in St. Petersburg there, and then in Kyiv in the Ukraine. Those places that we were shooting, the spokesperson is Alicia Turkina, who's a curator of contemporary art at the Russian State Museum, a splendid human being, and a very good curator of contemporary art, and is known well throughout all of the former Soviet Union for her work. And so she was able to get us into shoot at places where people had never shot before. When we were shooting in Peter the Great's room at the rooms in the opening, and then when the stories relating the life of Alexander were actually shooting in Alexander's study, and the same for Nicholas. So we shot in wonderful places, all really through Alicia Turkina's wonderful work. In some places like the Ukraine where she wasn't known, all we had to do, however, was say that we were shooting a film called Levsha, and that is so known and loved. This story is so known and loved by the Russian people that we were welcomed wherever we went. So, yes.
Can you make a connection between sciences working on the molecular level and in particular nanotechnology
Right.
to this kind of art?
We did at the museum in 1993 actually an exhibition called Nanotechnology Machines in the Microscopic Realm that presented actually no nanotechnology at all, but in fact another related form called micromachining. Nanotechnology is building up of machines, creating machines essentially through the use of molecules. And micromachining is in fact, rather than an additive process like nanotechnology, micromachining is a subtractive process that's been developed through work that was originally done in the creating of computer chips through silicon-based etching practices, only far more sophisticated than computer chip, because it's etching on multiple layers than things that at just unbelievably small scales spring open and make contrivances. Things like motors with the diameter of a human hair or smaller, half the diameter of a human hair, little gear trains, none of which at this point has much practical application, but someday will. when Richard Feynman I don't know when, in the late 60s, issued a challenge to the scientific community to make a motor in 1/64 of an inch cube and to put a whole piece of text on the head of a pin, and a fellow named Bill Rowley from Pasadena did a motor that scale, and we presented it as part of the what we call the nanotechnology, mistakenly the nanotechnology exhibition, and it was a wonderful opportunity for Bill to meet people like Yu-Chong Tai, who's a practitioner at Caltech, and Chris Peaster, who used to be here at UCLA, but I've heard has moved on. These people and other people from around the country who are doing this really remarkable work. Richard Feynman was attempting to actually create this, what he felt to be this new form of technology that was just waiting to be developed. And Bill did essentially an end run around his challenge by creating a motor in the old way, a wire wrap motor, by developing a kind of wire that was half the diameter that Richard Feynman thought possible, so that he was able to actually do this in this mischievous way. But Feynman was delighted to give him. Feynman offered $1,000 of his own money to whoever did both of those tasks. A number of years later, Feynman went to Armenia, and I think, Shirley, you must be joking, he talks about having met Edward Kazarian and talked to him about miniature sculpture. And Edward Kazarian, in that interview, saying that he believed that the source of microminiature sculpture actually came from religious persecution, from Christians in that part of the world who had been severely persecuted, making objects of worship smaller and smaller and smaller until they just got carried away. Right. Anything else? Yes.
How much of the appeal for you personally is the fact that it is, as you said, such a shadowy world?
Well, I'm shadowy. I don't want to misrepresent it. It is. I think, as in any field like that, where there are people with a great deal invested in their work, and Nikolai Sejestri, not the least of them. When we did our original interview, Ralph and I, with Nikolai Sejestri, well, I should preface that by saying Hagop Sandaljan was among the most humble and generous people I've ever known in my life. Really remarkably wonderful human being. And everyone who came in contact with him had the same feeling. When we met with Nikolai Sejestri, he began the interview by saying that he felt that he was a manifestation of God, and essentially we were not. So he had kind of a different view of his skills and talents, and sort of the source of his skills and talents. So Nikolai Sejestri is not in a position, for whatever reasons, to admit that he in fact had a teacher. And we, in this interview, tried to probe. Alicia Turkina did the interview, and she's very skilled at it, and tried to probe to find his roots and his inspiration, and he very deftly dodged each question. So it's not, shadowy isn't maybe the right word, but you understand that. Linda.
I was very moved by the passage where Nikolai was talking about invisible work.
Right.
I just wondered about your own reflections on
Invisible work.
Yeah.
Right.
He was talking about monumental going in two directions, towards the very small and the very large, and the
Right.
work that's
Right,
invisible.
right. I remember actually reading an essay years and years ago by Aldous Huxley, writing about art and how the truly most inspirational paintings were at least to Aldous Huxley, were paintings of vast scale and of very close-up things. And I think that actually Nikolai has a point there in terms of this crazy scale reference where very large things are inspiring, but also this world, which is worlds within worlds within worlds of that microminiatures, I think, suggest and call up in us. This this sense, this possibility, and Nikolai to his great credit, says that the work that he's doing is really nothing in nature scale. That, obviously, this goes infinitely smaller, and I think somehow just coming in touch with those sort of limits, or maybe lack of limits, is just somehow inspiring for us. It's like in some way touching infinities, in the infinitely small and the infinitely large. I don't know if that even came close to. Okay. Yes.
I just thought of this when people were asking about whether this is particularly Eastern European or Russian
Yeah.
dollar. Have you ever looked at the connection between this impulse in art and the Matryoshka dolls, the nesting, very characteristic dolls, and how small anyone
Well, that's funny because that is actually curious that I hadn't ever thought of those, because they're such. It's every nuclear physicist selling things on the streets in St. Petersburg is selling those dolls, and in the larger version of this talk, I begin by reading a piece that is written by Flann O'Brien, an Irish literary genius, extraordinary fellow who wrote a book called The Third Policeman, and it's a portion of the story where a police officer shows the unnamed protagonist work that he's created, which is boxes within boxes within boxes within boxes, to the absolute infinitely small. It's brilliantly written and just leaves you, staggering. But that's very much like the dolls, and I had never made that connection in my mind. So, thank you. Yeah.
I was wondering how you preserve the work. Like, what happens to the
Wait, say it again. How
do you preserve the work?
Oh, that's a horrible question. We're really, we just are in the process. I just spoke with Cyrano Sandaljan, Hagab's daughter, today about valuing an insurance claim that we're having to make, where Mickey, who we didn't show, was maybe unwisely placed on loan with the Children's Museum in Salt Lake City, and an exuberantly delighted kid shook the mount to the place where Mickey fell from his little perch and was lost. So it's we're concerned. We traveled the work across. We've traveled the work in the last year or two. We've traveled it pretty extensively. They went to Seattle, and they were at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. We sent, I think, about 21 or so of the miniatures of Hagab's around. Went to the DeYoung and to Seattle, and then across Canada, and all survived remarkably well. I mean, we were very careful, and we had designed vibration-resistant cases. But we are concerned because Hagab simply was using adhesives. To the eyepieces that you look through are, on some of them, not all of them, were simply glued to the top piece of acrylic. And one by one, those were breaking and falling, and fortunately, three of them fell, and in each case, they just missed the miniature. So we went back and did some conservation and reinforced the eyepieces, which we could do pretty carefully, but without too much difficulty. But the adhesive that's holding the miniatures to the needles is something that we dare not touch. And all adhesives get brittle with time, or almost all adhesives, and quite certainly the adhesives that Hagab was using. So we are very concerned about that, actually. And there aren't so many places you can go for conservation of this kind of work, really. Anything else? Yeah. Is there a special process? They, both Nikolai Sejestrian and Hagab Sandaljan, who are the only two people we've ever really had the opportunity to observe, working used a dissecting microscope, which is a three-dimensional binocular microscope, and simply tools of their own making. And the tools typically were gemstone, like a diamond or a ruby that had been shattered, and then that tiny little fragments of shattered gem remaining very, very sharp were then adhered to the tips of a sharpened needle, and those became like a little adze or a little axe with which they were able to carve these, tiny, very, very small things. Haggab Haggab being the only one that painted, talked about paint being the great dictator and how he had lost many pieces to a single stroke of paint that in fact was too large, too much paint on his sharpened hair, and it would simply entomb 10 months worth of work in a single unpenetrable solid ball of paint. I think it's difficult. He talked about having to paint between heartbeats so that the blood coursing through his veins wouldn't cause his aim to be misdirected. Yes.
Sorry, sir, how does one sculpt a human hair? I mean, how does it stay firm enough to actually manipulate?
How do you hold it?
Yeah,
Well, how do you hollow it out?
Or how do you hollow?
well, that's
Or to hold?
hold it and then sculpt away without it kind of bending.
Well, the piece of hair that they're beginning with is so small. I mean, it's so. I think that they actually left an armature. At least we asked almost that question of Nikolai, and he said that he left an armature. But I think the armature is like, I'm guessing a 32nd of an inch or something. So there's very little. It's like dealing with the length versus the width. It's dealing with something that's like this. So it's not like dealing with a whole long hair at all. It's really in its proportions. It's quite stable. It's like a log, like a small log, and I don't have a clue how they hollowed out a hair. And we should. I really next time. We intend to go back and talk with Nikolai more, and I need to ask him how on earth do you hollow a hair? Well, I can't believe we didn't. Right. There are actually many miniatures, and there's one that I didn't show. Actually, the Edward Kazarian did, so I didn't show it. We didn't get as far as his work, but he has 7 Stradivarius violins inside a hollowed human hair. Yeah, right. Yes?
Are they passing these techniques on to any disciples?
So far as we can tell, they are not. I mean, there are people. I think that it is difficult to pass this work on. I think the amount of instruction that can be passed is actually preciously small. I think it's something that each of these people has developed by themselves. Haggab Sandaljan did work with Edward Kazarian. Actually, Edward Kazarian came to Haggab Sandaljan with Edward Kazarian came to Haggab and asked Haggab to teach him to play the violin, or to better his violin playing. And Haggab said, I will do it if only you teach me the craft, the art of microminiature sculpture. And so each one became the other's teacher, which was quite wonderful. But my strong sense of it is that there is not so much. There are some techniques and some beginning approaches that can be taught, but beyond that, it's something that a person just does with themselves in order to. And there are people who are now trying to teach themselves, some of them even in this room. Yes.
Just taking a step back a little bit to the process of curation of the museum in general.
Yeah.
I was wondering, this collection has sort of sprung from your initial interest in the carved fruit stuff.
Right.
And I'm wondering how, it seems that many of these, Athanasius Kircher,
Athanasius Kircher, right.
Yeah, it seems like many of them are sort of these people with very specific mindset and the way that they approach their art and things like that. I'm wondering how you find, how you, in terms of researching and moving into these
It, although it wasn't really part of our original thoughts in founding the museum, it does seem that we find ourselves drawn to individuals who have pursued endeavors, oftentimes endeavors that have not been recognized on a broader scale, but have pursued these endeavors with a great deal of life energy. They come to us in the strangest ways, right? Well, in all such cases, like Hagab Sandaljan, and most recently we're doing an exhibition, well, a couple of exhibitions that sort of fall in those realms. One is the work of a fellow named Al Richards, who spent the whole of his life doing stereoscopic X-rays of flowers, which are just astonishingly beautiful things that have not yet been exhibited, primarily because of the difficulty of exhibiting them. But we simply stumbled across his work in the most unlikely kind of way. We're also exhibiting soon the work of a fellow named Henry Dalton, who did another microscopist who in the 19th century did mosaics from the scales of butterfly wings and diatoms, and the wonder not being that he was simply able to do these, but that he did them so beautifully, so artfully. They're really quite exquisitely nice. And that work came to us through someone who had heard of our interest in microscopic work and approached us saying, I have this collection, would you ever have any interest? And it didn't take us long to say yes. So it's I can't say how we come across them, but
And then sort of as a follow-up, I noticed that in the credits of the film, there was the Museum of Freud's Dream.
right, the Freud Dream Museum, which is one of there are a handful of institutions around the world that we feel that we are in cordial cooperation with, and that's definitely one of them. It's a wonderful place. It has only been it opened on the 100th anniversary of the publishing of Interpretation of Dreams, which was in 1999, I believe August. I could have the date wrong, or maybe October 4th, 1999, sometime right in there. It was created and curated by a fellow named Victor Mazin in St. Petersburg, who happens to be married to Alicia Turkina, the narrator of our films. But we would be in cordial cooperation with them even if they weren't married. It's a great. If you ever find yourself in St. Petersburg, and I encourage everybody to do that, definitely search out, and you have to search out the Freud Dream Museum. Should we say stop? All right. Well, thank you enormously, and please, those of you who haven't visited.